Greetings, party people. I hope that you all have been doing well. Today is going to be a very good day. One of the best days I've ever had trackside, and it's all driven by one thing. Run-through power.
What? In case you haven't seen my video on foreign and run-through power, I'm going to give you a quick crash course here.
Now, as you guys probably know, trains move a lot of stuff, and the stuff that they move often travels thousands of miles between its origin and destination, which means, inevitably, some of the goods that move on a train will originate from one railroad and terminate on the trackage of a different railroad. And in an age of standardized power where locomotives in between railroad companies are pretty much the same, instead of switching the power at the point where the two railroads will meet, the power from the first railroad will just stay on the train and run on the second railroad's trackage until the loads get to the destination. Then, after that, the second railroad will run a return train to return the first railroad's power back to its original trackage. And especially in this day and age where diversity on the railroad is declining every day, run-through power can definitely make an outing trackside a lot more colorful and interesting. And when it does happen, it tends to happen for two types of moves. Either bulk moves of raw materials or for intermodals. And our first stint of run-through power clutching up will be on the bulk side, and will actually take us from the United States all the way up to Canada. I know, absolutely horrendous.
Specifically to the province of Saskatchewan.
Now, it's no surprise that Canada has a lot of raw materials to export, and there's one material in particular that they are the largest exporter of in the world: potash. Now, potash isn't actually a specific compound, it's really a label describing a bunch of different salts that all have potassium in them. But regardless, the fact that potassium is in them means that they're very good for fertilizer. And you know, since everyone around the world eats,
Canada is able to export potash that they mine out of the province of Saskatchewan
to customers all over the world, both in the United States and overseas. Now, while there are a few companies that do mine potash from underground, there are only two that really matter to us. One of them is Mosaic, and the other is Nutrien, both of these being shareholders of the company Canpotex, which I believe stands for Canadian Potash Export.
I promise that we're going somewhere with all this info. Just stick with me here.
Canpotex is the company that oversees the transfer of the potash from the mines through the rails to the ships, and then finally to the destinations wherever it may be. They have their own specific fleet of thousands of railroad cars that are specifically designed to carry potash to either customers on land or to ports to be shipped out overseas. And of course, you know, Canpotex is not actually a railroad, so they will not be the ones that actually pull these trains from point A to point B. For us today, that is done by Canadian National, which runs this train as B746 out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. If we look back at a map of Saskatchewan, I was able to locate 5 mines that belong to Mosaic and 7 mines that belong to Nutrien. And in the middle of one of the clusters of all the Nutrien mines is Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where Chappelle Yard belonging to Canadian National is located. So it seems that from all these mines that are clustered around this area, there's some sort of train or local that collects all these cars into the yard here, and then CN will eventually run a long train of these cars out from Canada and all the way to Chicago, Illinois, where the train gets handed off to CSX, but the CN power will stay on. And with the train now in their hands, CSX will run train B241 from Chicago, Illinois, all the way down to Tampa, Florida to Rockport Yard, which is a port, get ready for this, for rocks.
Oh my god.
I know, crazy. At this point, barges will be able to come in, receive the potash loads brought in from B241, and then hit the waters to take these loads overseas. Where exactly they're going to, I'm not too sure. Canpotex has a few international customers that they list on the website, and geographically, it doesn't make sense for some of these to receive some of these loads, but I honestly don't know where these loads are going to in particular. If you do know, feel free to share what you know. Anyways, back to the train. If you've been tracking, you've noticed that this power is from Canadian National, traveling from Canada, running through the United States all the way to Florida, which means that power that would typically be running thousands of miles away is somehow finding its way on the eastern coast of the United States.
And on this day, CSX B241 was being led by CN 3115.
Oh my god.
The Canadian National BC Rail Heritage Unit. Now, this power is usually running thousands of miles away from where I'm at, and away from a lot of the people on the eastern side of the United States. So as you can imagine, with news of a CN Heritage Unit leading a train through the United States, everyone and their extended family came out to see this train. And I would be one of them. Yeah, I wanted to join the cool kids. Oftentimes, CSX B241 gets routed through Birmingham, Alabama, so there are plenty of times where this train won't even pass through my area. But thank God that this train in particular was set to run through Atlanta, Georgia, and on a day where I wouldn't have class until noon. Thus, I woke up early in the morning and found myself next to CSX's most wonderful and amazing line, otherwise known as the W&A. I'm definitely lying, this line is abysmal. Even though these tracks are a shell of what they used to be, usually if there's a special train that's going to be coming into Atlanta, it's almost certainly running through here. So I decided to wake up early and find myself in Marietta, where there's a lot of light and it's not a quiet zone, anticipating for B241's arrival. I didn't know where it was at the time, but I knew that it hadn't passed here, and I was pretty certain that it was going to come through relatively quickly. And fortunately for me, about 30 to 40 minutes after I'd gotten here, and with the sun rising to bring in more light, I would finally hear a horn off in the distance, and knew that this incredibly rare prize had finally arrived for me to see. Y'all know me, I'm a chaser. I was definitely trying to see this as much as I could. But before I could even leave this city, in the 5 minutes that it took me to walk back to my car, just as I was at the crossing gate, by complete surprise, I heard a horn behind me. Here we have been jump scared by CSX I-197, bringing international loads from Savannah all the way to Etowah, Tennessee. And once again, being short as always. Literally a shrimp of a train, but hey, at least it's something, and it was definitely a nice surprise as I was leaving through here. And now with it gone, it was time for me to start pushing south on the W&A to surprisingly find B241 stop. I figured that they were going to crew change down in Atlanta, so maybe there wasn't enough space in the city for them to come in to stop. I truly don't know. But regardless, with it being stopped here, I decided to maximize this opportunity and get as much footage as I could of this unit and its very well done scheme.
If we look closely at the nose of this unit, you'll see IPO 25, which hints to why all the CN heritage units exist. Believe it or not, Canadian National was originally founded in 1919 as a crown corporation, which basically means that it was government ran. And it was meant to consolidate the trackage of bankrupt railways, similar to Conrail in the United States. And just like Conrail, the assets of Canadian National eventually became public through the initial public offering that occurred in 1995. Since CN's introduction to the public sector, they have expanded and overtaken 5 different railroads. And to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the initial public offering, 5 heritage units were painted to celebrate the 5 railroads that Canadian National had acquired since the IPO, which explains the elements of this marking that we see on the front of this unit. This marking has the CN logo on the top, IPO 25 on the bottom, and half of a railroad track and tie set that has 6 ties in it, with the bottom portion of these ties outside of the gauge each having a different color. And in case you're confused why there's 6 ties instead of just 5, it's because the first one is colored red to represent Canadian National, and in fact, Canadian National has applied this marking to one of the regularly painted locomotives. The remaining 5 ties are all colored differently to match the schemes of the 5 railroads the CN has acquired, those being the Illinois Central, the Grand Trunk Western, the Wisconsin Central, the British Columbia Railway Company, and the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railway, whose original power can actually be seen on the Hartwell Railroad, which you saw a while back. Besides that, all 5 of these railroads have played a part into Canadian National's growth and have solidified themselves in CN's heritage. And fortunately, we're able to capture some of that heritage here. The BC Railway, whose origins date back to 1912, was acquired by Canadian National in 2004. This railroad is iconic for its scheme, its power, and definitely its horn. But with the takeover of CN and the inevitable reality of fatigue and wear, a lot of the original BC rail power has sadly gone to the scrapper. However, if you are fortunate, you can see some last survivors of the original company still running around. There are CN locomotives that are marked with BCOL to signify that they originally came from the British Columbia Railway. And now, fortunately, the latest of locomotives now bear this scheme to continue to carry on the legacy of this infamous railroad and move freight for the Canadian National. And speaking of moving, that's not what this train was doing. And after I got as much footage as I thought I needed, I would cross the tracks to not get backlit and wait for the shadows that were being cast on the nose of this locomotive by that tree over there to eventually leave to try to get some more stills. But suddenly, after an hour of sitting here and meeting up with a buddy of mine that had pulled up for the same reason I was here, B241 abruptly began to depart. With B241 on its way, I would be as well. And once again, I got randomly jump scared by yet another train. This is CSX E319 pulling empty coal cars for Indiana, marking the second train of the day that has spawned randomly on this line.
It's amazing.
Let me tell you, do not come out here expecting this to happen. This is not normal behavior. This line sucks. As E319 continues north and passes B241 heading south, I would continue on my way and absolutely hightail it to the next spot that I really wanted to capture this train at.
Whoa.
I'm currently standing on a road bridge that crosses the Chattahoochee River and looking at this CSX bridge that also crosses the river and leads into where B241 will promptly be going in for a crew change. And I'm very grateful that despite having basically no warning of when this train was going to show up, after about 10 minutes of waiting, the prize of the outing crossed the river. Very glad I was able to get this train here, and there was one last spot in the area that I particularly really wanted to catch them at. The infamous Death Trap, otherwise known as the CSX tunnel that runs under Inman Yard. I knew that for where this train was going, there was no way that they weren't going to take this tunnel. So I made my way here and met up with the Railroad Reviver Tour plug, if you can remember that guy. And absolutely tragically, at the exact millisecond that I step into view of the tunnel, I see this train coming out of it. Heartbreaking. Literally, if I had gotten there 15 seconds earlier, I would have had a video of this thing going under Inman Yard. And this wouldn't be the end of the blunders. There is a trestle that is right down from here that I definitely could have beat this train to. And in fact, the dude I was with did end up beating the train here. But I got a very important call just as I got in my car, and I was not gonna miss this call for this train. So I missed it there too. I then tried beating another train to the bridge, missed that one as well. It was just a dastardly way to end this morning outing, I'm not even gonna lie.
This guy stinks!
But hey, at least I saw it at the bridge, and frankly, with the amount of footage I got of this train, I am not gonna complain about what I got. And fortunately for me, I knew that this would not be the end of my time trackside for the day.
What do you mean by that?
I would leave now to start heading to class, but I knew that I would have another window to return back to the rails, this time on the Norfolk Southern side, where once again, the practice of run-through power clutched up. As I mentioned before, you'll usually see run-through power either on bulk or intermodal trains, and while on CSX we saw the bulk aspect of it, on Norfolk Southern, our stint with run-through power will be from intermodal traffic, specifically from Union Pacific. In case you aren't aware, a lot of the intermodal containers that you see literally travel across the country from one end to the other. And of course, since there isn't any transcontinental railroad right now, at least not yet, there will obviously be an interchange at some point, and a point where the power will just run through before getting sent back. And here in Inman Yard, we are looking at Union Pacific run-through power and Union Pacific 1943, the Spirit locomotive leading Norfolk Southern 28J. This train originally began on Union Pacific trackage as Union Pacific ZLAAI. The Z indicating it is a high priority intermodal train, the LA for Los Angeles, and the AI for its destination, Shreveport, Louisiana. Why it is AI, I have no idea. I was told it stands for Atlanta Intermodal, so that's what we're gonna go with. Now, as you all know, Union Pacific does not run into Atlanta, at least for now. So this is the point where Union Pacific at NS would usually interchange the train. However, with the presence of CPKC in this area, CPKC now runs as a middleman, with this train running as CPKC I-968 from Shreveport, Louisiana to Meridian, Mississippi as a foreign trackage rights train. That's a little confusing, but just know it goes from Union Pacific to CPKC to Norfolk Southern at Meridian, Mississippi. And then from Meridian, where it is definitely a Norfolk Southern crew, the train runs on its final leg all the way to Jacksonville. And although this train will make a couple stops on its way to its final destination, Atlanta is the most important one, because this is where the Union Pacific power gets taken off. The return train for this power is Norfolk Southern 29S, which runs from Atlanta, Georgia, back to Shreveport, Louisiana. Where at Shreveport, this train will then be handed over to Union Pacific for this power to return back to the West Coast. Out of Atlanta, Norfolk Southern will use its own power to continue 28J's journey down to Jacksonville, Florida. So when special run-through power does end up on this train, Atlanta is the last place you can see it at. Unfortunately, I'm here for school, and I knew that since 28J would be working the yard, I should be able to see them working as this run-through power completes the last of its work before getting sent back to Union Pacific. And thus, that's how I found myself back out trackside, now on Norfolk Southern territory, to see yet another instance of very rare run-through power. When I had first come here, 28J was stopped and there was some sort of smoke or dust going off in the distance. Knowing him, and they probably derailed. I don't know what was going on here. And there was other intermodal activity that was going off in the side of the yard, which I saw in the form of empty spline carts and well cars, likely getting moved over towards the container facility to get eventually loaded up. With the yard job gone, believe it or not, my attention would once again return back to the CSX rails. If you follow me, you'll recall that I've mentioned that CSX runs both around and underneath Inman Yard, and one of their crew change points, the same one that B241 was stopped at earlier this morning, lies at Pine Street, where there's a crossing. And while waiting for 28J to start moving, I heard a horn off in the distance and promptly saw the headlights of a CSX manifest that was beginning to head towards me.
Hello there.
So recognizing this and seeing that 28J still wasn't moving, I crossed the bridge to get a better view of whatever this was. It doesn't get any more sensational than this. What are the odds? I actually cannot believe that I saw this while I was out here. We are currently looking at CSX M583, getting ready to take the Appaville subdivision on its way up to Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And today, having 4 dead in tow EMDs, 2 of which are ex-Norfolk Southern SD40s.
I can't believe this.
And although one of my friends had told me that this train was coming like 6 hours ago, that was 6 hours ago. I'd assumed that this thing was long gone by now, and was completely surprised to see this out of nowhere at the exact time that I'd come out to see NS28J. Just certified Atlanta magic. It doesn't get much better than this. M583 actually ended up stopping because that former NS power that it was carrying was actually getting dropped off here in Atlanta. So once all the power for that train was gone, I returned back to the NS side to see Norfolk Southern 291 beginning to depart Inman Yard and seeing signs of life on Norfolk Southern 28J. As 291 snakes around Inman Yard and other local yard jobs continue their work, I noticed that the front door on 1943 was open and that there was some activity in the cab, which suggested to me that this train was about to start moving. And while I was waiting for that to happen, once again, I looked over towards the Pine Street direction to see yet another random CSX train traversing the crossing over there. Back to Inman Yard, there was more dust going off in the distance. I still don't know what that was. A pair of old SD40-2s was clearing the hill. And finally, I saw a conductor walking down on the ground, which fully solidified to me that 28J was about to leave. And just a minute later, with this old vintage EMD pair running towards me, and yet another random cut of empty spine cars racing towards me, 28J departed from its stop and began pushing towards the south end of Inman Yard. 28J would stop briefly underneath me, and this gives us a little bit of a chance to look at some of the markings on this locomotive. This unit has Spirit of the Union Pacific marked on the nose and was designed as a commemoration for the U.S. Armed Forces. There was actually a bomber named the Spirit of the Union Pacific during World War II, which is why it's on the front of this locomotive now. And everything else, from the sequence of colors to the stripes that go down, all are inspired by some branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. And in addition to that, just behind the dynamic brake fan is a logo that says POW-MIA, Prisoners of War and Missing in Action, You Are Not Forgotten. It wouldn't even be 2 minutes after this train stopped before they began departing once again. And then within 5 minutes, they began reversing to go deeper into the yard. With 28J snaking off into the yard, I was pretty certain I wasn't going to see them again and would decide to leave them in yard. But like I said earlier, M583 had stopped, and since they were stopped by enemy yard, I figured that the power was at Hawaii. And sure enough, that's exactly where I found this train. As I mentioned before, the two black units on the end are former Norfolk Southern, and they currently bear the marking LTEX, which stands for Larry's Truck and Electric. I kid you not, that is literally what it stands for. And if you're a locomotive, you don't want this label on you. Because if you do get this marking, you're probably heading up to Ohio to rot. Until some class 1 is power short and needs you, or until you eventually get scrapped or cannibalized for parts. And since all the LTEX operations lie next to a CSX mainline, that's how this power ended up on a CSX train. Anyways, with nothing else moving here, I was kind of just waiting for some of the other traffic that I'd seen line through this area. And while I was waiting here, I once again got jump scared by some CSX power.
Good evening.
And this wasn't just any CSX power. Look closely, that is a heritage unit, leading a local. That was CSX 1875, the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Heritage Unit on CSX L694. Absolutely insane that I happened to see it here on top of all the other stuff I've already seen. And before I hear anyone say about, oh, look at the local L, 1, the scheme is mid, and 2, I was not worried about missing this train because I knew exactly what it was on. Local purgatory. This unit had been running back and forth in Atlanta for at least a month at this point, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before I saw it. And believe it or not, a month later when I came back out to these rails, I would find it once again on that same local. So GG's on that. I was just even more surprised at how much stuff I had seen on top of everything that I already passed by since I'd been out here. Oh, anyways, the first train that I was waiting for, Norfolk Southern 24A, arrived, and just as they arrived, the security guard by the Hawaii camera told me to leave. I don't know why. I've been coming out here for a year at this point, had never had any issues. Other security guards let me stay here, but for some reason he told me to leave.
Oh my God.
Fortunately, this train wasn't all that special, just 4 NSGEs. And there was a spot nearby that I could still view the Y and not have to deal with him. And this is where I would stay, watching Norfolk Southern 24A, bringing intermodal traffic up from Jacksonville, Florida, the same Jacksonville that will be the destination of NS28J. Well, we were approaching that time of the day. 24A was crawling, M583 wasn't moving, and I didn't see anything else coming by soon. So since I had class, I began packing up my stuff to leave.
Oh my God.
And within 20 seconds, I kid you not, 2 trains out of nowhere came from the right side and raced by me. In the spirit of me packing up my camera and getting ready to leave on my bike, I now have a triple race in front of me to close off this day. It doesn't get any more incredible than this. I lied, it actually does. Because when I eventually left here and left this triple race, I received a message on what the NS power was on 28J, now that the Union Pacific power had been taken off, and you wouldn't believe what they put on this. Absolutely insane stuff, man. I couldn't even complain about missing the Wabash because I've already seen it before. And everything else I'd seen today from beginning to end had made this truly one of the best days I'd ever had trackside. There was so much good stuff to see. And I'm glad that I was able to capture as much as I could for you all. I hope that you guys enjoyed this outing as much as I absolutely did. God bless. I will see you soon out on the high iron.